My heart pounded louder than the thunderstorm raging outside the vet's office, each clap of thunder rattling the windows and my nerves. I clutched the leash of my golden retriever, Max, who sat oblivious, tongue lolling, tail thumping against the linoleum floor. I wasn't here for Max, not really, but I couldn't admit that, not even to myself. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. A small-town clinic in rural Virginia where everyone knew everyone's business. Max had been limping for days, or so I'd convinced myself, though his boundless energy suggested otherwise. I needed an excuse to see him Dr. Ethan Caldwell, the new vet who'd moved to town 6 months ago and turned my quiet life into a kaleidoscope of longing and fear. At 25, Lucas Bennett, was a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart I'd kept locked away since high school. Growing up gay in a place like this wasn't just hard, it was a daily act of survival. You learn to blend in, to laugh at the right jokes, to never linger too long on a glance. But Ethan, with his sharp green eyes and easy smile, made blending in impossible. The door to the exam room swung open, and there he was, white coat slightly wrinkled, stethoscope dangling around his neck. "Lucas, Max, you're up," Ethan said, his voice warm, like he was greeting an old friend. My stomach twisted. I'd been here 3 times in 2 months, once for Max's shots, once for a cough that was probably just him choking on a stick, and now this. Each visit chipped away at my resolve to stay distant, to keep my secrets buried. Max bounded forward, dragging me along, and I stumbled into the exam room. Ethan knelt to greet Max, scratching behind his ears with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "What's the trouble today, buddy?" he asked Max, but his eyes flicked up to mine, holding my gaze just a second too long. I swallowed hard, muttering something about a limp, my words tripping over themselves. Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't push. Instead, he began examining Max, his hands steady and sure, moving with a quiet confidence that made me feel like I was the one under scrutiny. As Ethan checked Max's joints, he asked, "You doing okay, Lucas? You seem tense." His tone was casual, but there was a weight to it, like he could see right through my flimsy excuse. I shrugged, forcing a laugh. "Just worried about Max, you know." But Max was fine. Ethan confirmed it within minutes, his limp nothing more than a playful exaggeration I'd latched onto. "He's healthy as ever," Ethan said, standing and brushing fur off his coat. "But you look like you could use a checkup yourself." I froze. Was he joking? Flirting? Or had he seen something in me I'd spent years hiding? The room felt too small, the air too thick. I mumbled a thanks, paid the bill, and practically dragged Max out, my heart racing faster than when I'd walked in. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but I felt like I was drowning. Ethan's words echoed in my head, and I knew this wasn't over. Not Max's limp, not my visits, not the way my world tilted every time he looked at me. Back home, in the cramped apartment above my auto shop, I tried to shake it off. I fed Max, cracked open a beer, and stared at the TV without seeing it. But my mind kept drifting to Ethan, his steady hands, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to see me. Growing up, I'd learned to hide who I was. My dad, a pastor at the local church, had made it clear what he thought of people like that. I'd dated girls in high school, played the part, and buried my truth so deep it barely felt real. But Ethan was unraveling me, one glance at a time. The next morning, I found myself back at the clinic. No appointment, no excuse, just a gnawing need to see him. Max wagged his tail like it was a game, but my palms were sweaty as I pushed open the door. Ethan was at the counter, scribbling notes, and when he looked up, his smile was equal parts surprise and warmth. "Back so soon?" he asked, and I scrambled for a lie something about Max's diet. But Ethan didn't buy it. He set down his pen, leaned forward, and said, "Lucas, what's really going on?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The truth was too big, too dangerous. Yet standing there, under the weight of his gaze, I felt something shift a crack in the walls I'd built. Maybe it was the way he said my name, or the fact that he didn't look away. For the first time in years, I wanted to be seen. I stood frozen in the vet clinic's waiting room, Max's leash slack in my hand, his tail thumping against my leg. Ethan's question, "What's really going on?" hung in the air like a challenge I wasn't ready to meet. My mouth went dry, and every instinct screamed to bolt, to retreat to the safety of my lies. But Ethan's green eyes held me in place, steady and unyielding, like he already knew the answer I was too scared to give. I don't know," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. It was a weak dodge, and we both knew it. Ethan tilted his head, studying me, not with judgment, but with a quiet patience that made my chest tighten. "Max seems fine," he said, glancing at the dog who was now sprawled happily on the floor. "But you keep coming back. If it's not about him, maybe it's about you." His words were gentle, but they cut deep, slicing through the armor I'd worn for years. I wanted to tell him everything: how I'd grown up suffocating under my father's sermons, how I'd learned to hate the part of me that loved men, how every day in this town felt like walking a tightrope. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I muttered something about checking Max's diet again and turned to leave. Ethan called after me, "Lucas, I'm here if you need to talk. Not just about dogs." His voice was soft, but it carried a weight that followed me out the door. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work at the auto shop, fixing engines and changing oil, hoping the grind would drown out the noise in my head. But Ethan's face kept creeping in, his smile, his steady hands, the way he seemed to see me when no one else did. I'd never met anyone like him in this town, where people either ignored you or judged you. Ethan was different. He was 26. I'd learned from the receptionist, and had moved here from Chicago after vet school. Why he'd chosen this nowhere place, I didn't know, but his presence was like a spark in a room full of shadows. On Friday, I found myself at the local diner, nursing a coffee and trying to avoid my own thoughts. Max lay under the table, snoring softly. The diner was a safe enough spot. Nobody asked questions here unless you invited them. But then the bell above the door jingled, and Ethan walked in. My heart lurched. He wasn't in his white coat, just a flannel shirt and jeans, but he still carried that quiet confidence. He spotted me, waved, and slid into the booth across from me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his smile easy but his eyes searching. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my hands betrayed me, fidgeting with the coffee mug. "Just grabbing a bite," I lied, though I hadn't ordered food. Ethan didn't call me out. Instead, he ordered a burger and started talking about Chicago, about vet school, about how he'd always wanted a dog like Max, but settled for a grumpy cat named Oscar. His stories were light, but they pulled me in, making me forget the weight I carried. Then he leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You know, Lucas, you don't have to keep pretending everything's fine. Not with me." My breath caught. It was the second time he'd seen through me, and this time, I didn't have Max as an excuse. I wanted to tell him I was gay, that I'd been hiding it my whole life, that I was terrified of what it meant in a town like this. But the diner wasn't empty, and eyes were always watching. So I just nodded, my throat tight, and said, maybe someday. Ethan didn't push. He just smiled, paid for his burger, and left me with a quiet, see you around. But as he walked out, I felt a spark of courage I hadn't known I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, his kindness, the way he made me feel like I could be more than the sum of my fears. For the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to stop hiding not just from Ethan, but from everyone. By Monday, I was back at the clinic, this time with no pretense. Max was fine, and I admitted it when Ethan raised an eyebrow. I just wanted to talk, I said, my voice shaking. Ethan led me to his office, a small room cluttered with books and dog treats. He closed the door, and for the first time, I felt safe enough to speak. I'm not like everyone else here, I started, my hands trembling. I like guys. And I've never told anyone that. Ethan didn't flinch. He just listened, his eyes soft, his presence steady. When I finished, he said, thank you for trusting me, Lucas. You're not alone. And then, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, he added, I'm gay too. Ethan's words hit me like a freight train, stopping my breath and my heart in the same instant. He was gay. Here, in this small Virginia town where being different was a sin whispered about in church pews. Ethan Caldwell was like me. I stared at him, my confession still raw in the air, and saw the faintest smile tug at his lips, not mocking, but kind, like he'd been waiting for me to catch up. You're serious? I managed, my voice cracking. Ethan nodded, leaning back against his desk, arms crossed casually, but eyes locked on mine. I moved here to start fresh, he said. Chicago was great, but it was loud, chaotic. I wanted somewhere quiet to figure out who I am. Didn't expect it to be this quiet, though. He chuckled, but there was a weight to his words, a story he wasn't telling. I wanted to ask, but my own vulnerability felt too fresh, like an open wound. We sat in silence for a moment. Max sprawled at my feet, oblivious to the earthquake reshaping my world. I've never said it out loud before, I admitted, my hands twisting in my lap. Not to anyone. My dad, he's a pastor. He'd lose it. Ethan's smile faded, replaced by a look of understanding that made my chest ache. That's heavy, he said softly. But you said it now. That's a start. A start. The word lingered, heavy with possibility. I'd spent years building walls, convincing myself I could live without love, without truth. But Ethan's presence is calm. Unflinching acceptance was like a crack in the dam, and I wasn't sure I could hold back the flood. Before I could say more, the clinic phone rang, shattering the moment. Ethan answered, his tone professional, but he glanced at me with a promise to continue this later. I left the clinic in a daze, Max trotting happily beside me. The world looked different, brighter, sharper, like I'd been seeing it through fog until now. But fear crept in too. This wasn't Chicago. This was a town where people noticed everything. My dad's church was the heart of the community, and his voice carried weight. If he found out, if anyone did, it wouldn't just be whispers, it would be a reckoning. Over the next week, I found excuses to see Ethan. A question about Max's food, a follow-up on nothing. Each time, we talked a little longer, our conversations dancing around the truth we'd both shared. Ethan told me about growing up in a big city, where being out was easier but not perfect. I told him about sneaking glances at boys in high school, about the guilt that followed me like a shadow. We were cautious, meeting only at the clinic or the diner. but every moment felt like stealing something precious. One evening, Ethan invited me to his Placia small house on the edge of town, surrounded by fields. I hesitated, fear clawing at me, but the thought of being near him was stronger. When I arrived, Max in tow, Ethan was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili, his cat Oscar glaring at Max from the couch. The house smelled of spices and warmth, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. We ate, laughed, and talked about nothing: movies, music, Max's obsession with chasing squirrels. But as the night wore on, the air grew heavy with unspoken words. Ethan set down his beer, his eyes meeting mine. "Lucas," he said, his voice low, "what do you want? Not what your dad wants, or this town. You." My heart thudded. I wanted him, his laughter, his kindness, his courage. But wanting him meant risking everything. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Ethan moved closer, his hand brushing mine, sending a jolt through me. "You don't have to know," he said. "Just be honest with yourself. One step at a time." His fingers lingered, warm and steady, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a life where I didn't have to hide. But reality crashed in the next morning. I was at the shop, elbow deep in an engine, when my dad's truck pulled up. His face was grim as he stepped out, holding a flyer for his church's upcoming Family Values sermon. "Heard you've been spending time with that new vet," he said, his voice clipped. "People talk. Lucas. Be careful who you trust." My stomach dropped. He didn't know not yet, but suspicion was enough in a town like this. I nodded, muttering something about Max. But as he drove away, I knew the clock was ticking. My dad's warning echoed in my head all day, each word a hammer strike against the fragile hope I'd let myself feel. I kept my head down at the shop, focusing on the familiar rhythm of wrenches and oil, but the weight of his suspicion clung to me. By evening, I was a mess of nerves, pacing my apartment while Max watched, head tilted, as if he could sense the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to see Ethan, to feel that spark of freedom again, but fear held me back. What if someone had seen us at the diner? What if my dad's people talk wasn't just a guess? This town was a spiderweb every move you made sent ripples, and I'd been careless. Still, the pull to Ethan was stronger than my fear. I texted him, a simple "Can we talk?" And he replied instantly, "My place. Bring Max." When I arrived, Ethan was on his porch, a beer in hand, Oscar curled up beside him. The sight of him casual, unguarded eased the knot in my chest. Max bounded up, tail wagging, and Ethan laughed, scratching his ears. "Rough day?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face. I nodded, sinking into a chair, and told him about my dad's visit, the flyer, the veiled threat in his words. Ethan listened, his expression darkening but never wavering. "Small towns," he said when I finished, shaking his head. "They're beautiful until they're not." He paused, then added, "You don't have to face this alone. Lucas, you've got me." His words were a lifeline, but they also terrified me. Having him meant risking everything: me family, my place in this town, the life I'd built to survive. But as I looked at him, his green eyes steady and warm, I realized I was already too far gone to turn back. We talked late into the night, the conversation shifting from fear to something softer. Ethan told me about his first crush, a boy in high school who'd never known how he felt. I shared how I'd once written a letter confessing my feelings for a classmate, only to burn it in a panic. We laughed, the sound mingling with the crickets outside, and for a moment, the world felt safe. Then Ethan reached for my hand, his touch deliberate, and my breath caught. "I like you, Lucas," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "And I think you like me too." My heart raced, torn between joy and terror. I wanted to say it back, to lean into him, to let myself feel what I'd denied for so long. But the weight of my dad's words, the town's eyes, held me back. I squeezed his hand, unable to speak, and he didn't push. Instead, he smiled, a promise that he'd wait. The next few days were a tightrope walk. I avoided my dad, kept my visits to Ethan's clinic brief, but every moment with him felt like a rebellion. We stole glances, shared quiet smiles, and once, when no one was around, he brushed his fingers against mine as he handed me Max's leash. Each touch was a spark, igniting something I couldn't extinguish. But the town was watching. At the gas station, Mrs. Carter, a church regular, asked if Max was still sick, her tone sharp with suspicion. At the diner, whispers followed me, and I caught my dad's name in the mix. By Sunday, the tension was unbearable. My dad's sermon was the talk of the town, a fire and brimstone speech about protecting our values. I didn't go cold and face him, but I heard about it from a coworker. "He mentioned you," she said, her voice hesitant. "Said you've been distracted." Panic clawed at me. I needed to see Ethan, to anchor myself. But when I got to his house, he wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood on his porch, his face grim. Ethan introduced him as his brother, Mark, but the tension between them was palpable. "Dad sent me," Mark said, glancing at me. "He's worried about you, Ethan. Says you're getting too comfortable here." Ethan's jaw tightened, and I realized he was hiding his own battles, ones I hadn't even asked about. As Mark drove away, Ethan turned to me, his eyes tired but resolute. "My family's like yours," he said. "They don't get it. But I'm not going back to who they want me to be." His words hit hard. We were both fighting the same war, just on different fronts. That night, as we sat on his couch, Max asleep at our feet, I made a choice. I leaned in and kissed him, tentative at first, then desperate, like I'd been starving for it my whole life. He kissed me back, and for the first time, I felt whole. That kiss changed everything. It was like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark, warm and terrifying all at once. Ethan's hands cupped my face, his touch grounding me as the world spun. When we pulled apart, his eyes searched mine, and I saw my own fear and hope reflected back. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, unable to speak, my heart pounding with the weight of what I'd just done. But the high didn't last. The next morning, reality crashed in like a cold wave. I woke to a text from my dad. "We need to talk. Tonight." No details, just that blunt demand, and my stomach twisted. I spent the day at the shop, distracted, dropping tools and snapping at customers. Max sensed my mood, sticking close, his eyes worried. I wanted to call Ethan, to hear his voice, but fear kept my phone in my pocket. What if my dad knew? What if someone had seen us? By evening, I was a wreck, standing in my dad's living room, the same room where I'd grown up hearing his sermons rehearsed. He sat in his armchair, Bible on the table, his face carved with disappointment. "People are talking, Lucas," he said, his voice low but sharp. "About you and that vet. You've been spending too much time with him." I tried to play it off, mentioning Max's visits, but he cut me off. "Don't lie to me. I raised you better than that." The air felt thick, suffocating. I wanted to tell him the truth, to scream that I was gay, that I was falling for Ethan, that I was done hiding. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by years of fear. Instead, I mumbled an apology, promised to be careful, and left, my chest tight with shame. Outside, I sat in my truck, Max in the passenger seat, and let the tears come. I'd kissed Ethan, felt alive for the first time, and now I was right back where I'd started hiding. I drove to Ethan's, needing him like air. He was in his kitchen, chopping vegetables, and the sight of him so normal, so steady broke something in me. I told him everything, the words spilling out, my dad's suspicion, the town's whispers, my fear of losing everything. Ethan listened, his hands still, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and sure. "You're not alone in this," he said. "We'll figure it out together." For the next week, we were careful meetings at his place, late-night talks, stolen moments when no one was watching. But the secrecy took its toll. I saw suspicion in every glance, heard judgment in every conversation. At the shop, a regular customer mentioned my dad's sermon, his eyes lingering on me too long. At the diner, the waitress asked about Ethan, her tone too curious. The walls were closing in, and I felt like I was suffocating. Then came the letter. It was slipped under my apartment door and signed, typed in stark black ink, "We know about you and the vet. Leave him alone, or everyone will know." My hands shook as I read it, the words searing into me. I showed it to Ethan, expecting him to panic, but he just set it down, his jaw tight. "This is what they do," he said. "Scare you into silence. But I'm not running, and you don't have to either." His courage lit something in me, but it also terrified me. I wanted to be brave, to stand with him, but the threat felt too real. That night, I couldn't sleep, the letter's words looping in my head. I imagined my dad's face, the town's judgment, losing the life I'd built. But I also imagined losing Ethan, the one person who made me feel like I could be myself. By morning, I knew I had to make a choice. I went to the clinic, my heart in my throat. Ethan was with a patient, but when he saw me, he excused himself and pulled me into his office. "What's wrong?" he asked, reading my face. I took a deep breath, the words trembling on my lips. "I'm scared," I said. "But I don't want to lose you. I want to be with you out, open, no more hiding." His eyes softened, and he pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead. "Then we'll do it together," he said, "one step at a time." But as we stood there, the clinic door opened, and my dad's voice cut through the air. "Lucas, we need to talk. Now." My dad's voice was a blade, slicing through the fragile peace of Ethan's office. I pulled away from Ethan, my heart hammering, as Max whined at my feet. Dad stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled anger, his eyes flicking between me and Ethan. "Outside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I glanced at Ethan, who gave me a small nod, his expression steady but tense. I followed my dad out, Max trailing behind, the weight of the moment crushing me. In the parking lot, the air was thick with the threat of rain, gray clouds mirroring the storm in my chest. Dad didn't waste time. "I got a call today," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Someone saw you at his house. Late. You think you can hide this from me?" "From God." His words hit like punches, each one laced with the disappointment I'd feared my whole life. I wanted to deny it, to fall back on the lies that had kept me safe, but Ethan's courage burned in me. "I'm not hiding," I said. my voice shaking but firm. I'm gay, Dad. And I care about Ethan. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying. His face hardened, his eyes narrowing. You're confused, he said. This isn't you. It's him, that vet, pulling you into sin. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. You'll end this, Lucas. Or you'll lose everything: your family, your home, your soul. I stood there, frozen, as he climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving me with Max and a heart full of cracks. I went back inside, where Ethan was waiting, his eyes searching mine. I told him what happened, my voice breaking, and he pulled me into his arms. I'm so sorry, he whispered. But you were brave. Braver than I was when I told my family. I clung to him, the world spinning, but his warmth kept me grounded. The next few days were a blur of fear and defiance. The letter, my dad's words, the town's whispers, they were a noose tightening around us. Ethan and I decided to keep a low profile, meeting only at his place. But the secrecy felt like a betrayal of the truth I'd finally spoken. I wanted to be out, to live without fear, but every step felt like walking through a minefield. At the shop, customers were colder, their eyes lingering with judgment. At church, my dad's sermons grew sharper, though he never named me. I stopped going, but the guilt gnawed at me. Then came the second letter, slipped under Ethan's door this time. Leave town, or we'll make you. It was bolder, uglier, and it shook me more than the first. Ethan read it, his face calm but his hands trembling. We need to talk to someone, he said. The sheriff, maybe. This isn't just gossip anymore. I hesitated, fear clawing at me, but he was right. We couldn't keep running. The sheriff, an old friend of my dad's, listened to our story with a neutral expression. He took the letters, promised to look into it, but his eyes told me he wasn't on our side. Small towns, he said, echoing Ethan's words but with none of the warmth. People get worked up. Best to keep things quiet. It wasn't a threat, but it felt like one. As we left, Ethan squeezed my hand, a silent promise that we weren't backing down. That night, we sat on his couch, Max and Oscar curled up nearby, and planned our next move. Ethan suggested a community meeting, a chance to confront the town's fear head-on. I balked, terrified of the backlash, but his resolve was infectious. We don't have to hide, he said. Not anymore. They can't take away who we are. His words lit a fire in me, and I agreed, though my stomach churned with dread. The meeting was set for Saturday at the town hall. We spread the word through flyers, careful not to mention the letters, but framing it as a discussion about acceptance. The response was mixed, some curiosity, some hostility. My dad called me the night before, his voice cold. You're making a mistake, he said. You're choosing him over your family. I hung up, my hand shaking, but Ethan was there, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. As Saturday approached, the town buzzed with tension. I felt eyes on me everywhere, at the shop, the diner, even walking Max. But Ethan's hand in mine, his quiet strength, kept me moving forward. We were about to step into the fire, and I didn't know if we'd come out whole. The town hall was packed, the air thick with murmurs and the creak of folding chairs. Ethan and I stood at the front, Max lying calmly at my feet, his presence a small comfort in the sea of familiar faces, some curious, some hostile. My dad sat in the third row, his arms crossed, his gaze like a weight on my chest. I'd never felt so exposed, but Ethan's hand brushed mine, a fleeting anchor before we began. I spoke first, my voice shaky but growing steadier. This town's been my home my whole life, I said. But it's also been a cage. I'm gay, and I'm tired of hiding it. Ethan's not just my friend, someone I care about. And we're not here to fight. We just want to live, like everyone else. The room was silent, then erupted in whispers. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We're not asking for approval, he said. We're asking for respect. For a chance to be ourselves without fear. Questions came, some earnest, some sharp. Mrs. Carter asked if we were pushing an agenda. A young woman, Sarah, who'd gone to school with me, asked how she could support us. My dad stayed silent, his face unreadable. Then Mr. Thompson, a deacon at my dad's church, stood, his voice booming. This is a God-fearing town, he said. You're bringing shame on us all. My heart sank, but Ethan didn't flinch. Shame comes from hate, he said. Not from love. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the air felt different, charged, like a storm had broken. Some people approached us, offering quiet support. Others left without a word. My dad was one of them. I watched him go, a piece of me breaking, but Ethan's hand on my shoulder kept me upright. You did good, he whispered, and I clung to that. The next day, the fallout began. My dad called me to his house, his voice colder than ever. You've made your choice, he said. You're no longer welcome here. The words cut deeper than I'd expected, severing the last thread of hope I'd had for his acceptance. I left, tears burning my eyes, and went to Ethan's. He held me as I cried, Max nudging my hand, and promised we'd build a new home together. But the town wasn't done with us. The letters kept coming, each one uglier than the last. Ethan's clinic lost clients, and my shop saw fewer cars. Whispers turned to outright hostility. Someone slashed my tires, and a brick went through Ethan's window, narrowly missing Oscar. We reported it to the sheriff, but he brushed it off as kids acting out. Fear crept in, but so did defiance. Ethan and I decided to stay, to fight for our place here. We started small, hosting dinners at Ethan's house for the few who'd supported us at the meeting. Sarah, her brother, a teacher from the high school. They became our allies, our family. We talked about leaving, starting over somewhere new, but Ethan was adamant. This is our home too, he said. We don't run. His strength fueled mine, and I began to see a future where we could be ourselves, even here. One night, as we walked Max through the fields behind Ethan's house, the stars bright above us, I stopped and took his hand. I love you, I said, the words spilling out, raw and true. Ethan's eyes lit up, and he kissed me, soft and sure, under the vast Virginia sky. I love you too, he said, and for the first time, I believed I could be enough. But the next morning, I woke to a call from Sarah. You need to get to the clinic, she said, her voice urgent. Something's happened. My heart dropped as I grabbed Max and drove, Ethan beside me, his face pale. When we arrived, the clinic was trashed, windows broken, equipment smashed, and spray painted across the wall, leave or else. Ethan's hands shook as he surveyed the damage, but his voice was steady. They can break my clinic, he said, but they can't break us. The clinic's wreckage was a gut punch, shards of glass glinting under the morning sun, the hateful words on the wall screaming louder than any letter. Ethan stood in the debris, his face a mix of grief and resolve, while Max whimpered at my side, sensing the chaos. I wanted to scream, to find whoever did this and make them pay, But Ethan's hand on my arm steadied me. "We rebuild," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "This is our fight." The town was divided. Some rallied to help. Others turned away. Sarah and her brother showed up with brooms and trash bags, followed by the teacher and a few others from our dinner group. They worked alongside us, cleaning glass, scrubbing paint, salvaging what we could. Their support was a lifeline, proof that not everyone saw us as outsiders. But the silence from others, including my dad, was deafening. I hadn't seen him since the meeting, and his absence felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. The sheriff came by, took a report, but his dismissive tone told us nothing would come of it. "Probably just vandals," he said, avoiding our eyes. Ethan thanked him anyway, his politeness a shield, but I saw the anger in his clenched jaw. That night, we sat among the half-cleaned wreckage. Max and Oscar curled up nearby and made a plan. We'd repair the clinic, keep it running, and show the town we weren't leaving. But we also agreed to be smarter security cameras, a lawyer, maybe even a move if it came to that. Not running, Ethan clarified, his hand in mine. Choosing our battles. The next week was grueling. I juggled the shop and the clinic's repairs, while Ethan treated patients in a makeshift setup. Donations trickled in from our allies, enough to replace the worst of the damage. But the hate didn't stop. Another letter arrived. This one slipped into my toolbox. "You're next." I showed it to Ethan, expecting him to waver, but he just hugged me tighter. "They're scared of us," he said, "because we're not hiding anymore." Then came the turning point. Sarah organized a fundraiser at the diner, a quiet show of support for the clinic. To our shock, more people came than we expected. Old classmates, a few shop customers, even Mrs. Carter, who didn't speak but left a check. The event raised enough to cover the cameras and repairs, and for the first time, I felt the town shift, just a little. Not acceptance, not yet, but a crack in the wall of hostility. The biggest surprise came the next day. My dad showed up at the clinic, alone, his face weary. I braced myself, expecting another lecture, but he just stood there, looking at the new windows, the fresh paint. "I don't understand you," he said finally, his voice low. "But I don't want to lose you." It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a start. I nodded, unable to speak, and he left without another word. Ethan squeezed my shoulder, his eyes saying what words couldn't. Months passed. The clinic reopened, stronger than before. My shop steadied, and Ethan and I grew bolder, holding hands in public, sharing a dance at Sarah's wedding. The hate didn't vanish, but it faded, drowned out by the community we'd built. Max, ever the optimist, still bounded into the clinic like it was his second home, and Oscar tolerated him, barely. One evening, as we sat on Ethan's porch, Max chasing fireflies, I realized I'd found something I never thought possible, a life where I could be me. It wasn't perfect. Me, Dad, and I were still distant, and some wounds would never fully heal. But with Ethan beside me, his hand in mine, I felt whole. The vet had said Max was healthy, but it was me who'd gotten the real UPA chance to heal, to love, to live without fear. And as the stars lit up the Virginia sky, I knew we'd keep fighting, not just for us, but for anyone else who felt trapped in the shadows. Because love, like truth, was worth it.